And welcome back to the show. City Harvest is New York City's largest food rescue organization, helping New Yorkers who are struggling, about 1.5 million New Yorkers to be exact, helping to put meals on their tables, as well as rescuing about 111 million pounds of food throughout 2021, delivering it free of charge to hundreds of food pantries, soup kitchens, as well as partners and other communities throughout the 5 boroughs. Sharing now more details, we've got the Senior Policy and Government Relations Manager at City Harvest, Keith Carr, who's going to give us a little bit more as to the work of City Harvest and what's upcoming in the year 2022. And Keith, good to have you.
Yeah, good morning, and thanks for having us.
Hey, thank you. And as we're coming off of a holiday season, obviously 2021, the holidays are generally a busy time of year. But in addition for it being a busy time of year, we know that with COVID-19, the numbers are further exacerbated when it comes to food insecurity. So from your perspective, talk to us about how it's been throughout the holidays and December as we look at food insecurity here in New York City.
What I've been saying to a lot of the folks that have been reaching out to us, asking for help, I ask people to remember that people are hungry, not just around the holidays. I mean, people need food in July, people need food in February. So food insecurity and hunger, it's a present presence in our lives. And what the pandemic has really shown us is that most of us are closer to being food insecure than we really realize. But they always say that in New York, people are one paycheck away from being homeless, but you're really one paycheck away from, even before that one paycheck disappears, you're one paycheck away from being food insecure. And too many New Yorkers have to make a choice between putting food on their table and paying the rent, putting food on their table and making sure that the lights are on, putting food on their table and making sure that they pay their child's school tuition. So food insecurity is a reality that most people don't even realize that they're involved in their personal lives, that just because you have food in the house doesn't necessarily mean that you're not food insecure. If you don't really have a choice on what you eat, when you eat, or you have to decide whether you skip lunch or eat once a day, that's food insecurity. And most people don't really realize it because people think that being hungry or food insecure means that you have nothing at all to eat in the house. And for most New Yorkers, that's not the case. Maybe you do have something, but it may not be healthy. It may not be nutritious. And City Harvest is really here to make sure that in between those paychecks, in between your support, whatever you get, that you can receive food from one of the 400 food pantries or soup kitchens that we support. They can go there and get some healthy fruits and vegetables to make sure that your family has some healthy food to eat.
Amazing. I think that you put it in context when you talk about that food insecurity just means that you do not have, that you're a person that just does not have food at home, but you could have food and still be food insecure. So give us a little insight into how you're able to garner this food and to be able to get it to those houses, those families, and those places that need it the most.
So City Harvest is what we call a food rescue organization, which means it's not just in our early model. When we first started back in 1982, our founders would see restaurants throwing food out. At the end of the day, they'd go by a grocery store and see food thrown out, and they would rescue that food and bring that to a soup kitchen or to a food pantry or distribute it to the homeless. Now, City Harvest, almost 40 years later, we rescued and delivered in September our 1 billionth pound of food. So the food comes from food distributors, it comes from farmers, it comes from our restaurant partners who are fantastic. It comes from supermarkets as well as caterers. Anyone who has leftover food, they'll give us a call, or our food sourcing team reaches out to them to see if they have anything that they can donate to us. We also receive funds from the state and federal government to purchase certain things to make sure that regardless of whether we get donations or not, that there's always something in the City Harvest warehouse that we can distribute to our pantry network.
Tell me a little bit about how the pandemic has actually affected you. Everybody's been affected in some kind of way, but talk about the effect of the pandemic with you.
Just the pandemic has really sort of pulled the curtain curtain back to show everyone what I was saying earlier about everyone being closer to food insecurity than they really realize. But it's been actually amazing the way City Harvest has been able to respond to the pandemic. Since the inception of the pandemic, we've rescued and delivered about 240 million pounds of fruits and vegetables to deliver to our food pantries. But at the very beginning of the pandemic, because of fear and because of people getting sick and because of all the other factors that came into play, more than 1/3 of our food pantry partners, close to 100 of our food pantry partners, closed. So we had to pivot, and we set up community distributions, like we call emergency relief sites. We increased what we brought to our mobile markets. Our mobile markets are like farmers market style free produce giveaways that we do in all 5 boroughs. So we increased what we would bring to them. We also increased what we bring to our community partner mobile markets, sort of to fill that gap with all the pantries closing. But we also worked with the pantries that closed to make sure that they could reopen, and found out what do they need. Is it PPE? Do you need more volunteers? Do you need more shelving or storage space? So we have an entire network capacity team that works with our pantry partners to make sure that they have what they need to not just operate, but to make sure they stay open. So we've been able to help most of those pantries reopen. The reality is a couple of those may never reopen because the very nature of emergency food is that it's a charitable response. And the charitable response relies heavily on volunteers. And sadly, I would call some of our partners to speak with someone, and they would say, oh, Keith, we're sorry to say, Brother Jones, he passed away because of COVID. And that was just sort of the stark reality of the COVID crisis. And then the face of those volunteers is often you look at who volunteers. It's usually senior citizens or people perhaps with a disability. And those were the people that were told not to go to work, not to come out of their house, to stay at home and be safe. And so out of that fear and out of that precaution, a lot of folks just decided not to return to those volunteer opportunities. So we did help connect them with other volunteers like mutual aid groups and some other groups throughout the city. But until there needs to really be a shift in the way people look at a charitable response to any problem, whether it's emergency food or crime or neighborhood crime prevention, or our city governments rely too heavily on volunteer response. So there needs to sort of be a shift so that these disruptions in services don't happen again.
Yeah, amazing. And so many people adversely affected through COVID and this pandemic. And I think that even as we start moving on even further into 2022, we'll even hear more stories as well. Keith Carr, thank you so much for being with us here and sharing with us here on Open, and continue the great work that you got at City Harvest.
Thank you. Thank you. And we'd love it if anyone can go to cityharvest.org, and you can look at our volunteer opportunities and ways that you can support City Harvest. And also just a plug for my team, the Policy and Government Relations team. We recently released our new policy platform. It's our first really public-facing policy platform where we're looking at we can't work in food security work needs to really focus at the root causes of food insecurity, and those causes are racial injustice and inequity. So if you can take a look at that, then like I said, cityharvest.org, and we'd love to have your help and support.
Definitely. Keith Carr, thank you so much for being with us. Again, to reiterate, if you want more information, visit their website at cityharvest.org, and then follow them on Instagram and Facebook at City Harvest NYC. We encourage you, don't go anywhere. We got more show. Open continues coming up right after this.